peace and expand upon the harmony which is already exists in our society by creating or partnering such platforms, organizing different type of programs for the community at large in New Jersey. Well, today we are going to have a great program. We'll start with the prayers following the panel presentations and Q&A session. Please write your questions and comments on the chat box. Right after that, we will go into the breakout rooms for more private discussions, which will be managed by Reverend David. David, would you like to add anything to it?
No, we are going to ask you where you are finding hope during the pandemic, during the breakout room. So you might want to let that question run in the background for yourself as we go through the next half hour or so.
Okay, great. So, and then we will end the program with a music performance by Rabbi Marquette. Well, I hope we will all benefit out of this program. Now we're going to start with the Muslim prayer. I'll do the Muslim prayer and then we'll continue with the hymn from Pastor David selected. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. The Quran verses that I recited from Fatiha, the surah, the part called Fatiha Surah, and the translation is, in the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. All praise is due to God, the Lord of the worlds, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Master of the day of judgment, you alone we worship, and you alone we ask for help. Guide us to the straight path, the path of those you have blessed, not of those who have incurred your wrath, nor of those who have gone astray. May God, the most compassionate, save humanity from this pandemic, cure those who are ill, and give perseverance to those who lost their loved ones. May He help all those who are fighting against this pandemic, including healthcare workers, state officials, and volunteers. Amen. Mark, would you like to run the video?
Pastor David, I think, is running.
Oh, yeah. This is a song that we sing sometimes at Union. It's an ecumenical song originally composed in the state of Hawaii, and is a song that is ecumenical, interfaith, and a prayer for the whole world. And it's called "This Is My Song, O God of All the Nations."
Thank you, David. Well, now it's time for our panel to begin. I'll start introducing our panelists. Well, we have 3 experts today. They are going to speak on the topic of hope and faith in the face of the pandemic. In terms of their perspectives, they're going to give us some insight about the topic. Our first panelist is the Reverend David Shaw. Reverend David begins his ministry today at Union Congregational United Church of Christ. It was sent yesterday. Was it yesterday, David?
I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure what you mean.
I don't know. Where did
When did I start at Union?
Yes. When did you start at Union, Pastor David?
Yeah, some days it does feel like yesterday, but it was 2015.
Yep.
2015. Wow.
And that's when we first met.
Yes.
Right after he joined.
Yes.
Great. I don't know, where did I get that bio? Anyways, so great to meet you. I think this is my first time meeting you. That's why I put it today. So today is our first day meeting. Well, Shaw leads the 480 member congregation, right? I guess, as the 14th senior minister since the church was founded. Was it familiar to you, David?
Does that sound familiar to you? It sounds about right. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Great.
Would you like me to jump in?
Yes, that would be great, David. Please.
Okay. Yeah. So I know that our topic is about the pandemic and in its particularity, but I thought I would speak about hope from a Christian framework in more general terms, in part because I think that, Christian hope is derived from a lot of sources and a lot of places and had many influences, but is also, I think its origins are somewhat misunderstood. And so what I'm going to do is just share my screen again and put up some images that I hope will explain what I want to do here. So hopefully you all can see that fresco on the screen now. So, of course, Christian hope begins in the Hebrew Bible. I'm going to let Mark, if he wants to cover the entirety of the Hebrew Bible tonight, he can go for it. I just need to do the last couple of thousand years. So, while it's Advent, I thought I would ground this in the Easter story. And Christians are at times criticized, maligned for our belief seemingly in zombies, right? Jesus died. Jesus came back from the dead, ascended to heaven, and it's presented as a miracle that one can either deny or believe. And I don't think such a binary, do you believe that Jesus died, rose again, and ascended to heaven or not? I don't think that binary really existed a couple of thousand years ago. Certainly the idea that needing to believe in it as a necessary condition for entering heaven was anathema in much of Christianity. So our hope within Christianity stems from the Easter story, which is one of resurrection. And the Greek word, the language of the New Testament, is anastasis, which means literally an uprising. And so the question is, if resurrection is an uprising, who is it by? With whom? What are you rising against? So the picture you see on the screen is of an ancient fresco in a Byzantine church. And obviously the central and tallest figure in this depiction of the Anastasis, the uprising, is Jesus, identified by his halo and the ceremonial cross. And he strides forcefully to our right and looks backward as his right hand firmly grasps the wrist of a white-haired, white-bearded man who is identified as Adam. And behind Adam is Eve, and both Adam and Eve are being wrenched from a sepulcher. To the right are two figures, both crowned, and they are David and Solomon. And what appears beneath Christ that is emerging from a dark semicircular area below the ground that Jesus is standing atop of or trampling down is a full bearded figure whose hands and feet are chained. And he looks up, this figure, with frightened eyes towards Jesus, whose cross is actually seemingly holding him down. But that is Hades, which is a personification of death. He's the gatekeeper of Hades, which is the prison house of death. And to his right, hopefully you can see this, to his right are some locks and bolts and bars, which were originally part of a pair of bifold doors, which are now flattened on the ground, which blocks Hades from exiting where he is. And so there's all these deliberate connections between through crucifixion, there's a cross, both in Jesus' hand and down here, and an uprising, anastasis, or resurrection. They're like sort of two sides of the same coin. Many Christians throughout the ages didn't believe that Jesus simply died, but descended to the dead after his death, and then on the third day was resurrected. And what this fresco is depicting is that when Jesus descended to the dead, he liberates humanity from death and does so in community. He is literally dragging Adam, who is representative of all humanity, out of this place and across this void and into another place and into life. So it's not just one person who is liberated, but all people who are being liberated in the form of Adam. So hope in the Christian framework is not so much about whether you believe that Jesus died for your sins, but whether you believe in the capacity for Christians and for people of faith and for human beings to overcome the mechanisms and systems that allow death and isolation to flourish. So hope in the Christian context has to be seen, of course, as well, in the Black Christian experience in America that knows as profoundly as any other that hope doesn't eliminate pain, but sits alongside it and encourages people to find ways out of the systems and mechanisms that lead to death. We know this because white slaveholders did not want enslaved people typically to learn to read. And they didn't want enslaved people to learn to read because once enslaved people got hold of the narrative, got a hold of the text, they began to understand the whole biblical narrative arc is about hope overcoming the structures of death. But once they actually got to read the parables of Jesus for themselves, the truth of the Christian story led painfully slowly, but ultimately to abolition. We see hope in the collective stories in Christianity and individual heroes, where we can clearly see how they work to overcome the mechanisms of death and pointed towards a different reality away from those mechanisms and structures of death. To be sure, many Christians have supported slavery, and to be sure, many churchgoers were supportive of the Third Reich, and many churchgoers have been supportive of the separation of children at our southern border. But when I think about hope and I think about Christian hope, I often consider this man. This is Gino Bartali, who is my own personal inspiration. And this picture is on the wall in my office, and it's one that I turn to often when I'm feeling a little jaded. Gino Bartali was the champion of the Tour de France twice. He won the Tour of Italy 3 times in the late 1930s and 1940s. He's from the Florence area in Italy. And in some ways, fortunately for him and for others, he happens to have a pretty good excuse, a pretty good reason to be out on the road during portions of World War II, because he was a professional athlete, professional cyclist, and he needed to train, and he needed to train a lot, and he needed to spend many hours on the road. And it's hard to quantify now. Cycling is kind of a fringe sport, but in the 1940s, cycling was enormous, especially in Italy. So when he was stopped by soldiers, his bike was never inspected. He was usually approached for autographs because he was a huge star. He's like the LeBron James of Italy of the early 1940s. But what he was actually doing was transporting documents in the down tube of his bike. This is the down tube right there. He was transporting documents in his tube for the resistance in Florence and Assisi, and he was transporting documents that aided the resistance in helping Jewish people in the Assisi area, which is a whole network of resistance carried out by the Archbishop in Florence and monks in Assisi and many, many ordinary citizens, and also at least one superstar athlete. But Gino Bartali, thanks in part to his training during World War II, he ended up winning the Tour de France in 1947, and he helped save the lives of hundreds. And his story can be found in the book, The Road to Valor. So hope is everywhere in Christianity, and is here now in the ways, beliefs, actions of people who seek to overcome the structures and mechanisms that contribute to death and suffering. And the Christian story is rooted in the belief that as Jesus overcame these structures of death and suffering, so must we, as we are aided by God in that pursuit. Thanks for listening. You're muted, Adam. I think you're introducing Mark, perhaps.
Yes, thank you, David. Thank you, Pastor David, for your insightful remarks. Well, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Rabbi Mark Katz. Rabbi Mark Katz is a rabbi at the Temple Ner Tamid in Bloomfield, New Jersey. He is the author of The Heart of Loneliness, How Jewish Wisdom Can Help You Cope and Find Comfort, which was a finalist for the National Jewish Book Award. Well, we're going to listen Rabbi Mark Katz now. Rabbi?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So I want to actually begin with a story. This is a Jewish folk tale. When I think about hope, I often think about this story. So there was once a village where all the clocks suddenly stopped in the village. And every single day, people tried to fix the clocks, but nobody could figure out how to do it. So days passed and they became weeks and they became months, and finally they became years. Until finally somebody reached the village who was an expert clockmaker. So people came around and they said to him, please, can you help us fix our clocks? And he said, of course, come to the village square, bring your clocks, I'll see what I can do. And he moved clock by clock by clock. And the problem was that each of the clocks were beyond repair. They were rusted and broken and dirty and grimy, and they didn't work anymore. Until he finally came to one specific clock. There was a man who handed him that clock, and he looked at it and he said, this one I can fix. So he goes and he fixed the clock, and immediately the clock starts working again. So afterwards, everybody crowds around that man and they say to him, so tell us, what was different about your clock? And he said, I knew that my clock was not going to work just like everybody else's. But every single day I got up and every single day I wound my clock. And every single day I waited and it didn't work. And days passed and weeks and months and years, and I kept winding my clock until finally this man came. And because of that, my clock survived the cold and the rain, the dampness, and it didn't rust like everybody else's. The essence of what it means, at least from a Jewish point of view, to have hope is to, even though it feels like you are doing it in vain, to keep winding your clock. Now, this is an incredibly difficult thing to do, but it becomes all the more important at times just like this when we are facing this pandemic, because hope is actually an act of, I would say it's an act of defiance, because it's so much easier to despair. And so our job is every day to get up and to figure out how to continue. Now, continuing might look a little bit different for each of us, right? Continuing might be that every night I'm going to call a couple friends on Facebook. It might be I'm going to get up and I'm going to do my job despite the fact that it's not perfect because it's online. It's going to be potentially I'm going to go outside even though I'm scared, right? But every single act of that is winding your clock, because for Jews, we look at our history And our history is very much found, just like Reverend Shaw said, in the sacred stories that we have. And for Jews, the feeling of hope pervades every single one of our stories, right? This feeling of the Jews as they were slaves in Egypt, hoping to get out and not losing hope until God took us out of Egypt. The feeling that Jews who are in exile might hope to one day get back into the land of Israel. Hope pervades every single one of the Jewish narratives and teaches the Jews the power of hope as an act of defiance. Now, there's an important distinction, and I actually, if you were at Temple near Tamid, you heard me talk about this during the High Holidays. The distinction is between hope and optimism. Because I got to say, by the way, Jews are not optimistic, right? If you hear Jews, we often are complaining, and it's something that, like, look, the word kvetch, which is part of the part of our our lexicon, is a Yiddish word, right? But Jews are great at hope. That is the essence of what it means to be hopeful. And I think we all can learn about the distinction between the two. Optimism is looking at the world and calling it good. It's seeing the world as, to use the metaphor, or really to use the cliche, half full. To say everything's going to be okay, everything's going to turn out fine. In fact, everything already is okay and is turning out fine, if only we just have a positive attitude, the power of positive thinking. But hope doesn't function like that. Hope is not descriptive in the way that optimism is. Hope is aspirational. And hope hopefully lights a fire under you to try to build the world that you want to build, right? Hope is what allows you to keep winding the clock. And sometimes you're going to speak out for justice and try to make a change, but at other times, it's simply the act of getting up every morning with the knowledge that you just got to make it through today, and then you got to make it through tomorrow. And that one day the light is going to be at the end of the tunnel, and we are going to find ourselves maskless and with antibodies in our bodies to try to make sure that we feel safe. We can't be optimistic about the world around us. That's only going to make us act out. That's only going to make us do things like showing up without masks right now, or being so tired of socially distancing that we put ourselves in harm's way. Hope looks toward the future, even if sometimes optimism blinds us. So I want to leave us with one final thought. In Judaism, and now I'm going to get back down to like real brass tacks here as a way to understand hope as a metaphor. In Judaism, we have a set of law, right? It's called halacha in Hebrew, which pretty much hews like Sharia law for Muslims, right? This kind of law that oversees all aspects of our lives. And one of the things that our ancient rabbis 2,000 years ago talked about a lot, especially in the Talmud, is this idea that if you were to find some kind of article on the side of the road, you can't just pick it up and keep it. Because if you do, you're stealing. Somebody else has that article. So what do you have to do? You have to look for two things true about the article. If, let's say, you find a hat, if it's a generic hat and doesn't have any special symbol on it that someone could claim, it's called a siman, then you potentially could keep it. But the other thing is that the rabbis try to figure out when the person who lost it would give up hope. Because once they give up hope, they have relinquished their ability to keep it anymore. So if I lose $1, I get home, I realize it fell out of my pocket, I gave up hope right away. So if I find $1 on the street, I can pretty much keep it because it doesn't have a siman and because nobody had hope that it would stay. But if I lose my wallet, one that hopefully does have my license in it and one that has credit cards and a lot more money in it, I'm going to hold out hope for a long time. And the act of losing hope is called yeush, or despair. Now, what can we learn from that? We can learn that as long as we do not despair, as long as we hold out hope, those things that we seek, we will never fully lose. If you have hope, you will never fully lose your ability to see your family because you'll figure out a way within the pandemic to do it, and you will make it to the end to do it. If you have hope, you will never despair about your ability to potentially find work again if you lost it, because it will happen for you if only you have enough hope, and you'll find intermediate ground to do that. The goal is always to avoid Yeush. To do, in the words of Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, Ein ba'ush ba'olam, that there should never be despair in this world, because despair obfuscates hope. Despair covers it up. Despair pushes it out. And if we can figure out a way to privilege hope over despair, there is nothing that we can't do. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Mark. Those great remarks. Well, when you were talking about Yeush, we had the same word, Yeis. Yeis is the losing hope. It's the same word, I guess, maybe coming from the same root. Well, next we have Nuray Yurt from Peace Silence Institute. She'll be the presenter from the Muslim perspective. Dr. Nuray Yurt is the board president at the Peace Silence Institute, who is also the chair of the Interfaith Committee, who has been actively coordinating all these interfaith efforts for a long time now, right?
Yes, hi everyone. So great to see old friends. I mean, I think we've done a lot of programs and at the temple as well as Union and congregation. So now we are connecting through Zoom, which is really great. And I mean, this is one of the reasons I love these Abraham's tables, by the way. Like it's really, I felt really connected to what Pastor David was talking about, Rabbi Mark was talking about, not only the language, but also the faith and hope being so parallel to each other, right? Like, so if you look at the Muslim perspective in history, literally, like I'm coming back, you know, to 7th century, you see actually the first believers, the first Muslims, Muhammad, peace be upon him, and all of his friends had a lot of challenges. They had to really leave all their lands. They had to move to a different city. They had to really stay in a cave for a long time, trying to hide. And then once they moved to the new city, they actually had to have 2 years worth of blockage. Like nobody sold them anything, nobody gave them food, no, everybody, you know, basically blocked. So anybody who claimed to be a Muslim couldn't do anything with the rest of the world. So they pretty much isolated them and gave them no food, no business, no jobs, you know. So I think it's just that, like, being faithful, you know, requires all of us, you know, to go through hardships, you know, just like early Christians, which my hometown actually has an underground city with early Christians, because they hide from the authorities at those times, because that they were abiding by a different authority other than the government at the time. So you can see 9 floors of underground cities in my hometown that the Christians, you know, basically said, you know, had to live for a long time. They had their kitchens, they had their refrigerators, you know, from those days, if you think about it. And Rabbi Mark talked about definitely everything else, you know, Jews gone through. And I think that's kind of why I feel like faith and hope is just such parallel words to each other. Because if you look at all the history, all the stories that we've kind of listened to, it's all about comebacks. It's all about finding the good, even it looks on the surface bad. And that's actually why we actually use, this is a big terminology in Islam as well. We use hamd, you know, saying thank you to God, even for the difficulties in our lives. And why is that? Because we know there's always a light at the end of the tunnel. And that's actually why we can thank God for that light that's going to happen after the difficulties. So it's already embedded within the faith that we have. We say the word hamd 40 times a day in our prayers, you know, basically. So that's actually the most used word. And the most repeated names of God is the most merciful, the most compassionate, right? So those are the most repeated names in our prayers every day. So if you think about it, and we say those at least 40 times a day as well. So that's kind of the connection, right? Like when you actually have the connection to the most merciful, the most compassionate, and when you can link yourself, that's the light at the end of the tunnel. So every difficulty, then you know, by definition, by your belief system and by your connection to God, you know there will be a light. great. You know there will be great learnings. You know that you will become a better person by all the difficulties that we learn through, and we come forward. And I think, I mean, if you look at Quran as well, the same way that you've looked at the history in all of the faith bases, it is really critical. You see a lot of different um, events that happened, jaw-dropping, right? Like we have Noah's Ark, we have the same stories, very similar. We have Abraham's, right, stories. They really all are truly difficult stories to listen to and to understand and to empathize, to see, wow, they've gone through so much. So uh, Isaiah had similar stories, right? So we actually learn a lot of these stories also from the Quran, contextual in a manner, and understand that being faithful has to come with hope, because when you see all these faithful people going through difficulties in their lives, and we do currently, I'm sure, have lived through personal difficulties in our lives as well, right? Like, so this pandemic, I think, exponentially made all of us realize. I feel like one of the big pieces of this is everybody is going through this. Yes, everybody is going through that differently, but everybody is going through this, and we can help support each other. We can still understand and empathize with each other, rather than just being only ourselves in a difficulty that it's very hard to share with somebody else. So I think that's why I actually feel super blessed with the fact that all of us have faith to connect, have faith to see the light at the end of the tunnel, have histories to kind of take a look, and see how difficulties people lived through and still had a great ending. So I feel like we're super blessed with that, to just see the end of the story is always heartwarming. To end of the story is that the difficult times always passes, and remembering this, that we can connect to the same stories in our background. And I will repeat the same thing Rabbi Mark suggested. We are, Turkish American, as you know, and I think Middle East has that impact on people. Maybe we're not very optimistic people. In the verse of being realistic, actually, we become super pessimistic. So, but I think we have to be realistic, but that doesn't really take away the hope that our faith instills among us, because that's actually the connection, right? If the God we believe in, the connection, the faith groups, the community we have, is a big strength for all of us. And that's kind of the I think where the hope also starts with, right? Being able to connect with folks other than ourselves through our services on Sundays, through Shabbat nights, right, through our Friday prayers, just being able to connect, basically. And then after connecting to the community, being able to connect to God, who we know at the end of the day will always, the light will come. And the light might not be just having everything go back to normal, but all of us will understand how perseverant we were. I mean, that's kind of initially, as Pastor David and we were discussing, one thing that I really was so super surprised when the first pandemic started. I personally didn't think that the economy will survive this long, that myself, I mean, I won't be able to survive at home this long. And if somebody said you're going to be staying at home 9 months, I would have been much more depressed, most probably. Initially, I just thought this was a month thing. And then I realize now, looking back, we were able to survive. We were able to adapt. We were able to find new ways. We did about 7, 9 Thanksgiving programs with different congregations, for example. I would have never imagined that. I just thought that we're not going to be able to connect with people. We're not going to be doing anything. So I think God has a plan for sure, but I think we also recognize how perseverant we are, how adaptive we are. Like if somebody asks you, can you change? Can you adapt? And maybe the answer is no, but when you go through the process, you find that strength in you, and you find that the possibility for you to connect is already there. That God reminds us all the time through our faith, that through history, through the stories. For Islam, in the Quran, verses that we do, if you look at Muhammad, peace be upon him, life, it's never like a great life, right? He had to flee the country and then the state, and then he had to have wars with his own friends, his own uncle, because of this. Like, so it was devastating when you think about it. None of them really, Jesus, Moses, none of them had easy lives when you look at that. So that's kind of the hope. I think I feel like their faith and hope is like really twin sisters, and we have to go back and forth to really keep it going, right? One is having hope on the moment, but one is to keep it continuous. I think to keep it continuous, in my opinion, is the big power of connections, services that we attend, and so that we keep remembering the hope and the history and what happened, and how we can come back, as we came back from many things as the human, as the humans. And I think we will come back from this as well, and more strong, more connected, right? Even though now we used to love personal connections, now we're okay with Zoom connections as well. So just new adaptations, new curves, but I think we will definitely come out of this strong, especially as the faith community. And I just feel very blessed, just the fact that we are part of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Nuray. That was great. Well, everyone sounds like hope is necessary with the faith instilled in our hearts. I hope that we will hope again. We hope, always hope. From the beginning of the life till the end of the life, we have to hope. Hope is in action, as Rabbi Mark said. That has to be in action, as everything in this universe, acting every day. Even the pandemic is there, right? So there has been a lot of hurricanes, a lot of circumstances have been gone through the world, through the lives of the human being. But the world is continuous. The sun comes up every day, and goes down, and the moon comes up next and goes down. So the life circulates every day. So that continues till the end of the life. Then what left? Everything is in action. The hope has to be in action. I hope we don't lose our hopes, even the pandemic or any other circumstances from now on. Well, we will go into question and answer session right now. We are kind of running short on the time. It's 8:42 right now, so we will have one or two questions. I don't see any questions written on the comment section, so you can raise your hand and unmute yourself if you would like to ask questions.
If you can't unmute, you can chat, and hopefully we can unmute you.
I just clicked it. It's possible now for people to unmute themselves.
Thank you.
Anyone?
That's
we can
okay.
come back.
Yeah, we can go to the breakout rooms,
Yes.
and folks can talk in a more intimate setting. We'll
Exactly.
do 15 minutes. Does that work?
Yes,
There's
perfect.
6 or 7, maybe as many as 8 in a breakout room. So so the question for your breakout rooms is where are you finding hope in the midst of the pandemic? I'm going to send you all off now. We will reconvene about 7:58.
Awesome.
Thank you, David. If you got any trouble, let us know.
Yeah.
Well, I think people are still coming back from the breakout rooms. How was your discussions? I hope you liked it. Great. Well, I think we are running on the time, Pastor David. We are at the end now. So I would like to give a special thank to our presenters today for the great, insightful remarks on the topic. And I hope we will continue these efforts in the near future, coming together, with the members of different faith groups, community members from different, organizations, from different, partners that we will keep organizing those type of events for the fruitful dialogues, building our community, continue building our community with those dialogue efforts. And would like to thank to our organizers today, partners, again, for helping us to set up this program, and all of you for joining us tonight. We will close it with with a song by Rabbi Mark Katz.
All right. So look, many of you might have heard the song before. I love it because it's got two languages, Hebrew and Arabic. And when we think about peace, right? Peace Island Institute, we don't just think about peace in terms of the absence of war. In Judaism, at least, the word shalom, which is peace, also means kind of an inner peace, a strength, a wholeness, which is what we're really searching for when we hope, when we look for resilience during this time. So it begins Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, which means peace will come, and then Salam, which is Arabic for peace. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu ve'al kulam. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu ve'al kulam. Salam Aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam. Salam Shalom. Salam Aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam. Salam Shalom. We'll do it one more time. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu ve'al kulam. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu, Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu ve'al kulam. Salam Aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam. Shalom, Salom. Salam Aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam. Salam Shalom. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to all of our partners. It's so wonderful to be with you tonight.
Thank you, Rabbi Mark. It was great. Salam, shalom. Pastor David, would you like to add anything?
Nope.
Okay.
That was
We're all
great.
good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for everyone's partnership. Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you so
everyone.
much. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Hope to see everyone soon.
Yes, good.